Okay, good morning, everyone. If when this event gets a capacity, anyone has any issues joining, you can let them know that we are also live on YouTube. I'll be sharing the link in the chat. And I think we can begin. So I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for this webinar on building Caribbean marine resilience. My name is Jean-Pierre Kavanagh, and I'm the visibility and PR consultant of the Caribbean Regional PPCR. And I'll be your host and moderator of this morning's webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to set some ground rules. Well, based on the Zoom webinar platform, we can't jump in and jump out in terms of turning on our mics and such. So once we get past the presentations and past the panel discussion, we'll be having an open Q&A for all attendees. During that segment, if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, you can raise your hand, or you can ask it in the Q&A section of the Zoom platform. Now, how to raise your hand. You look at icon labeled participants at the bottom of the device screen, and then click the button labeled raise hand at the bottom right of your screen. At that point, you'll be unmuted and allowed to speak. Once you're unmuted, or before you're unmuted, I encourage you to be aware of your audio and video settings to avoid static feedback. When your mic is unmuted, please ensure that your device is out of the direct path of any wind or any fast so that we can hear you clearly. Now, I'd like to welcome today's speakers. And so we'll hear greetings from the program manager for the Caribbean Regional PPCR, Mr. Ainsley Henry, who will also bring greetings from the IDB. And our presenters today are the Deputy Executive Director of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, Dr. Susan Singh-Renton, the International Team Director and Climate Change Adaptation Lead at ESSA Technologies, Jimena, Eyzaguirre, the leader of the ICT for Fisheries Consortium, Dr. Kim Mallalieu, and joining us later will be a researcher and lecturer at the University of Guyana, Dr. Paulette Bynoe. Now, before we get into the greetings and presentations, a word on our project. The Caribbean Regional PPCR is a $10.39 million project designed to improve regional processes of climate-relevant data capture, storage, analysis, access, transfer, and dissemination, and to pilot and scale up innovative climate-resilient initiatives, which is where this work would fall. It is being executed through the project management unit that falls under the University of the West Indies Mona Office of Research and Innovation. So attached to the program, you may hear the acronyms PMU, MORI, or PMU-MORI. Now there are 6 pilot countries: Dominica, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And the work being discussed today falls under component 4, which is applied adaptation. Now I'll invite the program manager, Mr. Ainsley Henry, to bring greetings and to give us an overview of why we're here.
All right, good morning, everyone. First, let me start by saying thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to be here. we do find that this media is a very good way of getting a lot of information out to people, and we're hopeful that the proceedings today will be useful to you all. As Jean-Pierre mentioned, my name is Ainsley Henry. I'm the program manager for the investment plan for the Caribbean Regional Track of the pilot program for climate resilience. This project, as he's mentioned, is being funded by the climate investment funds through the Inter-American Development Bank. As a consequence, my role here today is to bring greetings, not only on behalf of the MONA Office for Research and Innovation, but also for the climate investment funds and for the Inter-American Development Bank. Now, at all three agencies, we find that climate resilience and building climate resilience among small island developing states such as ours in the Caribbean is one of the urgent things that we have to do as we move forward. Towards that end, this project was designed to work across several different sectors. Now, the sector which we'll be discussing today is specifically the marine sector, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But just as an overview, I will give you a little bit of information about the other components. The first component under the project, component one, is geared specifically at gathering up-to-date and new current information about the geospatial information that can be used to do things like development planning, etc. So towards that end, the project has funded the data acquisition, the LiDAR data acquisition at 3 sites in Jamaica and Haiti, and is in the process of facilitating training across the 6 countries that the project is working in. Component 2 is specifically geared at improving data collection, data storage, and use of climate relevant data. And towards that end, we've been working with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. And there have been several upgrades to weather stations across the region. We have built a failover redundant system that allows for the data to be stored at 3 sites simultaneously and will allow for that information to always be available regardless of what is happening in any of these countries. In addition to that, manual for training has been developed, and there has been extensive work done on a framework document that will allow for the development of climate products and services for various sectors. Component 3 is specifically related to the downscaling of global climate models to regional and sub-regional climate models. Towards that end, we've been working with the Climate Studies Group at the University of the West Indies, MONA. They have already completed that activity to the 25 square kilometer resolution, and they're currently doing a 10 square kilometer resolution. Additionally, they're in the process of finalizing a website that will allow direct access to that information in short order. And I expect that will be very useful to stakeholders across the region. Component 4 is the component under which the Marine Initiative falls. And in addition to marine, there's agriculture, there's rainwater harvesting, and there is health. Now I'll just speak specifically about the marine. Now this is being co-implemented, or was being co-implemented, and at this point I should pause to say thank you once again to the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, and in particular Dr. Singh-Renton, who were both instrumental in ensuring that this component was not only successfully completed, but was completed within time and within budget. I should also take the opportunity to thank both Jimena and Kim, who led the various consultancies that allowed for the completion of this work and delivered excellent outputs, as you will hear today, that I believe will be of tremendous value to stakeholders across the region. Now, specifically, under the ICT for Fisheries Consortium Consultancy, the primary product was the development of a fisheries early warning and emergency response system. as you're going to be hearing quite a bit about that. I won't be getting into any detail on that, but just to say that we believe that this is pivotal to enabling fishers who we recognize to be a vulnerable group in the region to build their own resilience and to improve the way that they interact with the marine environment. Additionally, under the ESSA consultancy, Jimena and her team also developed important environmental and regional databases and facilitated the creation of a portal through the CRFM that will allow access to that information as well. There's also been a slew of public awareness building materials that have been generated. And again, you'll hear more about all of that. Now, the importance of fisheries and food security for the region, and as an emerging, and not an emerging, but a growing part of the blue economy cannot be overemphasized. And it is with that in mind that the Mona Office for Research and Innovation, the University of the West Indies Mona, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the Climate Investment Fund, in collaboration with the Project Management Unit at UA, are very proud and happy to welcome you to this webinar today and to wish you that it's a successful one and that you are able to gain a lot of valuable insight. Thank you all. Good day.
Okay, thank you so much, Ainsley. Just hearing Ainsley give an overview, also being familiar with the outputs of this project, it gets me so excited because this is real and applicable work. And as he said, you know, fisheries are a key part of not only regional food security, but also coastal livelihoods. And so building resilience into them is key going forward. Now, before Susan presents, I'll give you a little information about her. Susan holds a DPhil in fisheries biology and is currently the Deputy Executive Director of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism Secretariat. Her primary research interests are fisheries ecology and management. She has been an advisor and negotiator for CARICOM in International Tuna Fisheries Management Fora since 1992, providing the lead support for catch negotiations and also for remedial measures to remove illegal fishing sanctions. During the years of 2004 and 2014, Susan spearheaded the CRFM annual scientific meetings and associated technical working groups, which have generated essential management advice on key commercial fish stocks in the region, and which have also allowed CRFM countries, as needed, to be formally recognized for their international standards of fisheries management. For example, Marine Stewardship Council certification. During 2008 to 2019, Susan was CRFM's lead for the design and delivery of key training courses in statistics, stock assessment, value chain management, and monitoring and analysis of climate change impacts. Since 2012, Susan has led CRFM's contribution to wider regional initiatives addressing major cross-cutting issues in respect of food safety controls and standards, seafood commodity development, and climate change action. Now, I invite Susan to bring her presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Pierre, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to participate in this seminar this morning. I was asked to, as I'm coming first, my presentation is intended to sort of set the context for the following presentations. So I'm hoping that you can see my screen now.
Yes, your screen is being shared, Susan.
Okay, thank you. And moving straight in, you've already heard from Ainsley Henry about the pilot program for climate resilience, so I wouldn't spend too long here, just to remind you that this program is all about strengthening information, strengthening how we acquire it, how we store it, how we analyze it, and how we access that data and how we disseminate it. So all the activities have been about strengthening the information base, which is of course very important at this time for climate change matters. And there is also a responsibility to pilot and scale up these initiatives, which you will hear about in the subsequent presentations. The marine focus has really been co-implemented by the CRFM, and of course has had a big focus on the fishery sector, which is the main, well, the economic sector that we're most interested in. Now, one of my favorite Calypsonians, if not my favorite Calypsonian, is the mighty Chalk Dust, and he has a song about seawater and sand. And really, I think at this time, it's a good reminder that all we have is seawater and sand. When it comes to fisheries, fish is a renewable resource. So it's a resource that if we manage it properly, it's there. It's a living organism and it reproduces, so it's a renewable resource. Fisheries for the CARICOM family is very important for foreign trade, for employment, for creating livelihood opportunities, and it has a major role for food security. And actually this applies, I think, throughout the region. But fisheries management faces a number of challenges. We have poor practices in the field. We are dealing with a lot of illegal fishing issues. We are dealing with habitat degradation, not all brought about by fisheries activities, pollution, because also what happens, activities on the land can affect the quality of the ocean, and also the, of course, life in the ocean. So pollution is a big issue. And we've also had issues with invasive species, and many of you will remember about the lionfish invasion, which we are still dealing with. So fisheries faces all of these challenges. And on top of that, we have to consider climate change. So our seawater and sand is actually changing before our eyes. And with the impacts of climate change, because the climate is getting warmer, so what we're seeing are warmer seas, and these warmer seas are going to carry less oxygen. Less oxygen is a problem for life in the ocean. Another climate change impact is sea level rise. This is also impacting on ecosystems and livelihoods in the coastal areas. Our ocean is also becoming more acid as a result of climate change. We are also dealing with a saltier ocean, and an ocean that is becoming very fast, less productive. So climate change has now compounded the challenges for the fisheries sector. Under the pilot program for climate resilience and the marine component of it, we have had two assignments. The first one dealt with the development of an early warning and emergency response system for fishers. And in fact, it is an ICT solution that has been developed. And this presentation follows. So you will be hearing a bit more about the activities that have led to the development of this ICT solution. And we will be discussing, of course, what we will be doing next with regard to following up and scaling up on this system. The second assignment has dealt with the conduct of ecological and socioeconomic impact assessments, and also the development of an associated monitoring system. So we've completed impact assessments, which have produced an incredible amount of information, new information and very useful information for management and planning purposes, and also a monitoring system. We have tools and guidelines for monitoring, and we also have a portal, and you'll be hearing a bit more from Jimena on that later. Last year, CRFM and sister organization of CARICOM, SEDIMA. SEDIMA is concerned with disaster emergency management. We signed an agreement to enhance disaster management and resilience in fisheries. And of course, this agreement was inspired by the development of FEWA, which is the acronym for our Fisheries Early Warning and Emergency Response System. And of course, this is going to be supported. Our agreement with CRFM and SEDIMA and our agreement to work on advancing FEWA and sustaining it. This is for for scaling up the initiative. First of all, has foundations in the comprehensive disaster management strategy of SEDIMA, and also is supported by our own updated regional strategy and action plan by the CRFM. In SEDIMA's strategy, one of their priority elements deals with information management, and another priority element deals with sectoral integration. And for the CRFM strategy, our strategic element 2 in particular supports our work on FEWA and its follow-up. Our work under the PPCR, this program, and also our own regional strategy is intimately linked with the CARICOM regional framework. And the new draft, the new framework that is coming in for the next decade has 11 strategic elements. And just to indicate to you, it was developed by 5Cs, of course, and it's the first framework, that was in 2009, was signed off by the heads of government. There were 5 elements in that framework, but of course, as climate change issues are becoming more complicated, the second framework now has 11 strategic elements. And the CRFM, as a result of the information that has come out of the second assignment, we've been able to update our strategy. And we now have 9 elements in our new updated climate change and disaster risk management strategy. And 9 of the 11 CARICOM elements are included in our strategy. You'll see where you're seeing the X, those are the elements those are the strategic elements which are not included in the CRFM strategy. And they're not included simply because it makes more sense for us to contribute through our sectoral lines of management for a more holistic approach. So those elements deal with cooperation and governance at the country level and at the broader regional level, not just the CRFM level, but even broader regional level. And with that, I will conclude, and thank you very much for your attention. So hopefully, Jean-Pierre, I have just warmed you up for what's to come. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Susan. You've given a wonderful overview about how the work not only is relevant for the aims of the project, but how it plugs into what we're trying to achieve as a region. And our next presenter is Kim Mallalieu. Now, before she presents, just let me give you a short introduction on her. So Kim Mallalieu, who holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from MIT and a PhD in Electrical Engineering from the University College London. She's also a Fulbright Fellow, is a senior lecturer in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of the West Indies, where she leads the Communications Systems Group. She's the principal investigator and coordinator of the Caribbean ICT Research Program and the leader of the ICT for Fisheries Consortium. Her professional interests are multidisciplinary, predominantly revolving around regionally appropriate technologies in support of development, with an emphasis on emergency communications and traditionally excluded populations. She was a founding member of DIRSI, a Latin American and Caribbean network of academics and research on ICT policy and regulatory intervention for social inclusion. She also conceived and coordinated the delivery of the master's degree in telecommunications regulation and policy to over 30 developing countries around the world. She has served on several boards and councils, including the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, for which she is currently deputy chair. She is the recipient of local, regional, and international teaching, as well as research awards and other awards of distinction. Kim?
Good morning, and it is a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I am sharing my screen. So thank you very much for all who have preceded, protocols observed, chat with you about multimodal, multi-stakeholder resilience building for small-scale fishers. So small island developing states are very vulnerable to weather and climate change. And we recognize that this does not only apply to persons on land, but also those at sea, and that more than 2 million square kilometers of the CRFM 17 states is occupied by sea, the EEZs. Small-scale fishers are particularly vulnerable. 90%, in fact, of the 30,000 vessels in the region are less than 12 meters in length. We recognize the frequency and intensity of North Atlantic hurricanes are up since the 1970s. So a number of sectors have responded in reaction. The Caribbean fisheries sector is adopting the National Disaster Risk Management, DRM plans. Caribbean ICT sector is prioritizing DRM, disaster risk management, in alignment with global policy frameworks. Several UN agencies, in particular the FAO, the ILO, and the IMO, recommend that vessels less than 12 meters in length carry a cell phone at all times. At the same time, the Caribbean Comprehensive Disaster Management, CDM strategy, to which Susan has just referred, covers the spans 2014 to 2024. One of the outcomes, in particular, outcome 3, is the improved effectiveness of CDM at sectoral levels. So in this conversation, the sector of interest is the fisheries sector. We recognize that the Caribbean CDM, Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy, recognizes ICT as a cross-cutting theme. It also focuses on vulnerable groups and, in particular, securing lives and livelihoods, saving lives and property. So you are familiar now with the genesis of the fisheries early warning and emergency response. This is a mobile application to reduce fishers' risks at sea through early warning and emergency response. FEWA facilitates emergency response, recovery, and risk-reducing capabilities that small-scale fishers access through the mobile apps, and administrators from key agencies access through a web-based dashboard. With this suite of mobile applications and the accompanying administrators' web-based dashboard, fishers are able to reduce their risks every day through the use of messaging. There is a messaging component of the app, but we recommend the use of standard messaging channels such as WhatsApp. Also, the recording of observations each day to reduce fishers' risks at sea. Prepare before an emergency. Fishers every day can check the weather and make informed launch plans. Fishers may send and receive relevant alerts between themselves and with the authorities. To respond during emergencies, fishers can access up-to-date current contact information for relevant first responders and apply knowledge learned from multimedia resources in the application suite that have been produced from authoritative sources. Fishers may recover after an emergency, for example, and many of these components straddle in different phases in the disaster risk management cycle. So, for example, there is a module in the application for missing persons. When a fisher goes missing, others can broadcast to help recover the fisher. And finally, there is a damage reporting module in the app that is used to record and report on losses and damages for assessment purposes. Fewer mobile applications are available in a number of different forms. There is the native Android form, which is the legacy version of the application built to support only Android devices. And this is accessible from the Google Play Store. It supports all features of the app. At the same time, however, it has the largest storage requirement on a fisher's phone, and it also requires Android developers for long-term support. We have developed a progressive web app, PWA, and this is an updated version of the application, which has been built using web technologies. And this PWA can be downloaded from a browser to the phone directly. It supports Android and iOS. It may contain less features, but the small storage requirement and the need for, the reduced need for long-term technical support make this a very attractive channel. Another is the Ionic Android, which is the PWA that I just mentioned, wrapped in a native shell for distribution, and this is accessible through the Google Store and the iOS App Store. This supports both Android and iOS. It supports all features, but it has a larger storage requirement on the fisher's phones, and it requires specialized developers for long-term maintenance. So we've talked about the Fisher channel, which is the mobile app. Now let's move to the admin channel, and that is the administrator's dashboard. The administrators manage fewer modules. Fewer, remember, is fisheries, early warning, and emergency response. So the administrators manage fewer modules through the dashboard, so web-based dashboard. There are country admins and a number of other admins. So the class of country admins include the Met offices, and these Met offices manage the weather reports, the disaster management agencies that manage the general alerts in the event of an impending disaster, the Coast Guard, which manages missing persons, the fisheries authorities, which among other things manages emergency contacts. Above the country level admin, there is a global administrators, and those include the CDIMA and the CRFM. Only authorized administrators may issue general alerts. The countries for which we were engaged, the ICT for Fisheries Consortium was engaged to develop fewer. Those countries are Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and Dominica. So we have trained administrators in all of these countries. Fewer CAP alerts is a very important part of the application suite. The alerts use this protocol, common alerting protocol, which is an international standard to communicate identical warnings from authoritative sources across multiple channels. In FEWA, these alerts may be generated by FEWA users directly, as well as predominantly the country Met offices, as well as the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, which does a great deal of work relevant to our region, and also third-party sources. So there is a protocol that the suite implements, of course, in which the disaster management agencies can create CAP alerts directly, and fishers may request that alerts are sent, and the DMA, which is a country administrator, has to observe and approve the request for broader dissemination. Fishers can, of course, generate alerts within their local communities, and these peer-generated alerts do not require the approval of an authoritative source, the DMA, for example. And whereas FEWA delivers directly the alerts to a variety of different channels, these channels can be extended with the required equipment installed in the countries to be accessible from a marine radio, a basic SMS, basic phone for SMS through SMS, and e-notice boards where they exist. Yeah, these are potentials because, for example, without an arrangement, the transmission of SMS messages is at a cost. But it is the case that just about all of the countries have negotiated positions with the local service providers that general CAP alerts that apply to the whole country are sent via SMS at a waived cost. So how FEWA works is there are national administrators in each of the FEWA countries, and there are multiple channels through which FEWA messages, particularly alerts, can be received. There are, in fact, multiple contributors to FEWA alerts, and of course, alerts are a key component of early warning and emergency response. And how this works internally is that we have created a rich cloud infrastructure that aggregates, creates, forwards CAP alerts, and draws on a set of FEWA web services to perform these tasks. The general approach is one of disaster risk management, in which fishers are vigilant, they record and use data on a regular basis, they stay connected, and they routinely manage their risks. And they do so through the entire cycle of disaster risk management, which is to say mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery. The means by which symbolically and physically we propose that they do this is that FEWA, along with other key disaster risk management tools, are in their bucket. Fishers have a bucket, and one of the tools in the bucket is a mobile phone with a FEWA installed. Forgive me. So successful early warning systems do not exist in a vacuum. Jeremy Collymore, in his final report, Early Warning Systems in the Caribbean, a desk review, has this to say. A successful early warning system has to meet several requirements, including the use of appropriate technology and know-how, clear responsibility of the parties, effective decision-making support mechanisms, functioning communication systems, and supporting preparedness instruments, including evacuation planning and response structures. He recommends that there are harmonized efforts and the sharing of a common early warning vision for the Caribbean through a Caribbean Early Warning Alliance, which, amongst other things, addresses gaps in early warning communications, accelerates efforts to engage all stakeholders in the early warning systems triangle, which is to say communities, authorities and agencies, and scientific and technical institutions. Establishes a strategic vision for early warning systems development, revisits and strengthens the governance framework for early warning systems, prioritizes investments, works towards the consolidation of national integrated multi-hazard early warning systems, and formulates a strategy for integrating Caribbean early warning systems into comprehensive disaster management, knowledge management infrastructure. So along these lines, successful early warning as well as emergency response for small-scale fishers requires a number of things, chief amongst which are that all agents play their role within the intersecting agendas of multiple sectors which all recognize the critical role of ICT in disaster risk management for the most vulnerable. Also, that all agents recognize that ICT is one of several components and a mobile one of several ICT tools in a broader strategy that requires, among other things, fishers' understanding of risks and mechanisms for mitigation and response, context-appropriate reinforcement of these mechanisms, relevant skills, operational support, and the incorporation of fisher engagement and support into the planning and operations of key agencies, including fisheries authorities, fisherfolk organizations, Met services, Coast Guard, disaster management agencies, and so on. So to close, I offer you a cautionary note about building fishers' resilience. And that is that we must manage our expectations and manage all that we do, recognizing that behavior change is necessary to build resilience. Yet the change of behavior for resilience competes with all priorities, distractions, resources, and demands for fishers' attention, as well as the attention of other agencies. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim. That was a very fulsome presentation, letting us know how fewer fits into the bringing fishers through the entire response cycle. And interesting for me was the fact that 90% of all vessels in the region are less than 12 meters in length. So building resilience, especially for that most vulnerable fishing population, is extremely key. I do have a question on fewer in the panel discussion, but we'll leave it for them. Our next presentation is Jimena Eyzaguirre. And Jimena is a senior climate adaptation specialist with 18 years of experience in analysis of and advice on climate action. Jimena's work focuses on equipping individuals and organizations to understand and incorporate the implications of climate-related risks and vulnerabilities into plans and decisions that affect environmental and social outcomes. Since 2006, Jimena has worked to advance adaptation and climate resilience within government departments and agencies, as well as non-governmental organizations. First, as a policy advisor with the Government of Canada, and more recently as International Team Director and Climate Change Adaptation Lead at ESSA Technologies Limited. Over the years, she has led or contributed to climate change vulnerability, risk assessments, provided analysis and facilitation services to development of sectoral, which include human health, agriculture, fisheries, and oceans management. Regional, that's Canada, North America, and the Caribbean, and the national adaptation strategies. Her work combines systems thinking, the integration of a wide range of perspectives, and a mindset focused on learning. Jimena?
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. And I will start up my video for the beginning, but then I think I'm going to shut it off because I've had trouble with internet reliability and I don't want my video to freeze. Anyway, good morning, everybody. As Jean-Pierre mentioned and Susan mentioned, my name is Jimena Eyzaguirre, and I am calling you from Ottawa, Canada. And in Canada, we're going through a period of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, Indigenous Canadians. And in the spirit of that, I'd like to acknowledge that I am calling you from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'm just going to pull up my presentation now. Hoping you can see my screen.
Yes, seeing your screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thanks very much, Susan, for your introduction to the project overall. As you related, it's a multifaceted project that looked at assessment, monitoring, and other planning tools, communications and outreach products, as well as strategy development. And it was tricky to come up with 15 minutes worth of content to share with you all today, but I've decided to focus on one component of the work that provides a useful starting point for adaptation, and that's the modeling-based climate change impact assessments that we undertook. And I'd like to acknowledge off the bats that one of our dear, awesome collaborators on the ecological impact assessments of climate change, Paulette, is joining in on the webinar. Hi, Paulette. Oh dear. Okay, there we go. So despite the progress made in the region, as you all know, in building the scientific evidence base to begin planning for adaptation and to begin assessing climate change risks, it's been noted that there is a lack of generation and use of quantitative information about climate change hazards and impacts for the fisheries sector in particular. And so our project set out to begin to close that gap. So today I'm going to walk you through the approach that we took, as well as a few results. And one major takeaway is a link to the CRFM data portal that Susan mentioned, where you can find a bunch of our project outputs there for you to look at. As you know, climate change affects marine species and the fisheries sector in many ways, so doing a good job of scoping was really important at the outset. And our scoping really took into account data availability, the modeling tools that we could build on, as well as feedback from stakeholders from CRFM, as well as from the 6 pilot countries that Jean-Pierre and Ainsley referred to. So our work focused on these 2 dimensions. We assessed the future ecological impacts of climate change and changing ocean conditions on Caribbean fisheries, as measured by changes in species distributions, richness, and potential catch. And then we also looked at the future consequences, economic consequences of these ecological changes due to climate change, as well as the economic consequences of increased tropical cyclone activity due to climate change. So starting with the ecological impacts of climate change. This slide summarizes the overall framework we used for ecological impact assessment, which included 3 phases, as you can see: data collection, modeling, and analysis, and the output of these key indicators on the right-hand side of the slide. Excuse me. So the first step was to select the key fishery species to include in our assessment. And the final list included 110 species, most of them fish, but some marine species, some marine mammals, as well as invertebrates. So as you probably know, marine species, fishes and invertebrates, have different thermal preferences and tolerances, and they can only live in environments where ocean temperatures fall within a certain range of these tolerances. So as the ocean warms up, temperatures are becoming too warm in some places for some species, leading to their local extinction. At the same time, some species can occupy new areas based on these changes in ocean conditions. So our assessment looked at or included 106 marine fishes and invertebrates with thermal preferences ranging from 12 degrees Celsius to 27 degrees Celsius. And you can see the distribution of these in this slide. Next, we assembled biological data for the selected species, as well as climate and ocean data that globally define the marine environment. And as you can see from this slide, we relied heavily on global databases for this data compilation. For example, we obtained climate and ocean data as modeling outputs for 4 distinct Earth systems models. Climate and ocean data were inputs into 3 distinct modeling approaches, and I will talk about 2 of the modeling approaches with you today, given time constraints. It's worth noting that regardless of the global model and emission scenario used, future climate and ocean conditions in the Caribbean Sea are expected to be warmer, more acidic, with higher salinity, less oxygen, and less primary production, as Susan mentioned earlier. This mapped output on this slide shows projected changes in sea temperature at the surface and sea bottom. So the top panel is the surface and the bottom panel is the sea bottom. Since temperature is the main driver of biological impacts of climate change on exploited fishes, the more or less even warming patterns at the surface and the warming following bathymetry at the sea bottom will have significant implications for the future of marine species in the Caribbean Sea. As just mentioned, we use 3 distinct analytical approaches to generate results for a series of indicators that are shown here. The use of multiple lines of evidence is for climate change impact assessment is a good practice, given the uncertainty in understanding and capturing the different dimensions and interactions among climate, environmental, and biological factors. One analytical approach we used was species distribution modeling. So we took the finest resolution of climate modeling completed for the Caribbean Basin to date as inputs into 4 environmental niche models to estimate the current and future probability of occurrence of each species in a given cell, as measured by a habitat suitability index, and the number of local species gains or losses across the assemblage of species modeled relative to the baseline. We can interpret the net change in local species present in a given grid cell as a change in local species richness. Results for all individual species modeled, the 110, are available in our project report as well as mapped outputs in the CRFM data portal that I mentioned. This slide presents modeled outputs for the common dolphinfish. So relative to the baseline, habitat suitability for common dolphinfish is projected to experience modest declines, as you can see, throughout much of the wider Caribbean, but very strong declines in areas of currently high habitat suitability in the northern Gulf of Mexico. So that you can see the current distribution there in the bright yellow. Declines in more southerly areas are expected to be associated with increases in habitat suitability in more northerly areas. So it's a bit of a mixed picture. And the spatial distribution of these changes are particularly important. So our modeling results indicate that climate change will cause habitat conditions in the Caribbean Sea to become increasingly unsuitable for marine fishes and invertebrates. It's not an exaggeration to say that climate change is an existential threat to the fish species in the Caribbean Sea as we know them today. Across the region, the sum of individual marine species habitat suitability index is projected to decline substantially, with a pattern particularly pronounced for the southern and eastern Caribbean Sea. The loss of suitable habitat for the majority of species is projected to result in high rates of local extinctions, especially in the northern and southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea. The combined effect of large declines in habitat suitability and projected species range shifts result in large changes in species assemblages across the Caribbean Sea. this is why I'm presenting this as an existential threat to the species and therefore the sector. A second ecological modeling approach that I wanted to talk about is spatially explicit population modeling that I'm highlighting here in yellow in the bottom. Prior attempts to look at the ecological impacts of climate change for the Caribbean have stopped at habitat suitability for the most part. But in this project, we were able to go a step further and model changes in abundance, which relate to changes in catch. We did this by using a dynamic bioclimate envelope model, the DBEM, run by our collaborator, Dr. Chung at the University of British Columbia, and Paulette and others. And this is a spatially explicit population dynamics model that simulates changes in distribution, abundance, and therefore potential catches of species. All in all, this model, DBEM, simulates the effects of changes in ocean conditions on physiological, population, and community level responses. And as you can see from the slide, the model takes into account many important attributes, but it doesn't consider everything. For example, it doesn't consider evolutionary adaptation of species or changes in food web dynamics or cumulative stressors, for example, and projections that we're able to generate in terms of maximum catch potential are only available at a coarse resolution. But this is the best available information for the Caribbean Basin right now on projected abundance. So as you can see on this slide, climate change is projected to result in a substantial decline in maximum fisheries catch potential throughout the Caribbean relative to the 1970-2000 period. Maximum catch potential is expected to drop due to the net effect of species losses, balanced by some species gains, and regionally, the decline in maximum catch potential is projected to be highest throughout the southern part of the Caribbean Sea. We are projecting a drop in maximum catch potential of over 30% for the more southerly countries included in our study under the high emissions scenario. Maximum catch potential is projected to decrease even if the world meets Paris commitments, stressing the need for the fishery sector to adapt. So throughout the slides and when I've been showing you the results are for two emission scenarios, as I mentioned, one, a high emission scenario consistent with the representative concentration pathway 8.5, and the 2.6 are emission scenario, which is reflective of the Paris Declaration Agreement, the Paris Declaration commitments. Okay, so with a few minutes I have left, I wanted to touch on the work that we did on the economic impact of climate change. This slide summarizes the overall research framework we used to assess the economic consequences of climate change impacts for the fishery sector in the 6 pilot countries. So as opposed to the work on the ecological impacts of climate change, which was at the Caribbean Basin level, the economic analysis was focused at the national level for the 6 pilot countries. In the next couple of slides, I'll talk about the economic impacts of climate-induced changes in fishery production or landings, which we assessed using a market supply-demand model developed for each of the 6 countries. So we developed sectoral supply-demand fish models for each country looking at the 5 species groupings shown here on the right. Our models are based on the analytical framework developed by Professor Day et al., or by Day et al. In the article shown here, and who evaluated the welfare impacts of climate change and climate adaptation strategies for fisheries in the South Pacific. The market supply-demand models track changes in economic well-being by examining the interactions among shifts in the quantity of fish supplied, prices, and quantity of fish demanded by consumers. With the market supply-demand model, we first project future demand, prices, future quantity supplied without the effect of climate change, and this is the reference scenario, and then overlay climate change as a supply shock for the 2 emission scenarios. The results of comparing the reference cases against the climate change cases measure the incremental impact of climate change or the economic losses and gains caused by climate change. So the projected decline in maximum fisheries catch potential under climate change that we just discussed has a number of negative effects that ripple across markets, as you can see on this slide. By 2050s, in under low and high emission scenarios, we can expect fish prices to rise, household fish consumption to decline, and overall economic well-being to drop as well. Regionally, economic losses were projected to be highest for the more southerly countries of the 6 that we looked at, consistent with patterns in ecological impacts as well. And of course, market effects have many social implications. For example, lower fish consumption than what households would otherwise want can lead to a decline in food and nutrition security, which is very concerning. Okay, I've provided a very quick overview of our assessment work, and there is a lot more you can look at. The CRFM data portal contains all our project reports, as I mentioned, as well as all the spatial modeling outputs and raw data from our impact assessment. So I invite you to take a look and see for yourself. Okay, with the last few minutes or so, I just wanted to leave you a couple of thoughts on how the quantitative outputs from this project can help with adaptation and climate resilience planning. So it's clear that climate change will alter Caribbean fisheries in many ways. You all know that. The information generated can help the fisheries sector regionally and in each of the countries that we looked at make the needed transitions. Some examples are just noted in this slide: fisher training to develop new fisheries given changes in species distributions, gear exchange programs, restricting fisheries for new species as conditions become more hospitable. Also, we think that the market supply demand fish models, which are Excel-based models that can be used fairly easily, can be used for evaluating the costs and benefits of alternative adaptation actions at a national level, which is something that we did not do during the project, but could easily be an extension. Finally, the spatial data layers that we have created can inform the many marine spatial planning initiatives underway in the region. In this way, future ocean development can take place without increasing stressors on marine species and safeguarding areas that could become climate refugia in the future. And with that, I'd like to thank our funders and collaborators, some of them shown on this slide, as well as all the fisheries managers that provided valuable local information and feedback along the way. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Jimena. And I appreciate that you touched on the fact that the portal was created and it is available. We will be distributing not only links to the portal, but also copies of all the material that has been created. A documentary was done, some posters were done as well to attendees of the webinar. So you'll get a data package once we are finished. Now, our next presenter is Dr. Paulette Bynoe. And she's the senior lecturer and the former dean of the Faculty of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Guyana. She has a PhD in geography from the University of Sussex in an MPhil in environmental education from the University of Bradford, and a BA in geography from the University of Guyana. Dr. Bynoe has approximately 24 years of professional accomplishment as an interdisciplinary trained environmental specialist who has taught postgraduates in courses in community disaster risk management, environmental impact assessment, environmental research methods, and environmental resources policy. Her research interests are in environmental education, natural resources and environmental policy, sustainable livelihoods and climate change, and disaster vulnerability. In 2015, she was awarded the Golden Arrow of Achievement by His Excellency, the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, for her contribution to environmental education and training, research, and the development of policies on natural resources management. Dr. Bynoe currently serves in various capacities, nationally, regionally, and internationally, and indeed joined us having just chaired an international meeting. Now, Dr. Bynoe's work was done on the component 3, which is our climate downscaling done through the climate studies group here at MONA. but her work was focused on 2 fisheries communities, one in Jamaica and one in St. Lucia, and we found it to be in line with what we were trying to accomplish with this webinar. And now I invite Dr. Bynoe to bring her presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. Good morning to everyone. I want to express my gratitude to be given this opportunity to share some findings on my research. As you would have been told, my research focused on Manchineel and Labouré, 2 communities, fishery systems, and the idea was to assess in a very exploratory way the communities, fishery systems, the climate variability, climate change. So I will focus on the key issues. In terms of my presentation, just an introduction, just to mention the data collection methods, the key findings, conclusion, and some general recommendations. So, yes. So we all know that Caribbean islands are vulnerable to natural hazards, particularly due to their geography. And in this respect, I can highlight location, because once we start talking about vulnerability, especially the component of exposure, locational vulnerability becomes critical. And of course, the small size. So you have a lot of concentration of people and dominant economic activities on the coast. And we also know, and for small island states, a very narrow range of resources. So you can find a heavy reliance on a particular sector. In the region, climate shocks represent a major threat to achieving economic growth targets and development prospects, even at the community level. The FAO estimates that by 2050, we'll have decline in fish species catches, and because, of course, this is related to changes in air and sea temperature, ocean acidification, rising sea levels, etc. In the 2 countries that my research was focused on, fisheries play an invaluable role, not only in terms of addressing hunger, we want to say achieving food security at household and at community level, but also improving the basic nutrition and, of course, fostering socioeconomic stability of many households. And when you consider fishing as an activity throughout the years, and in fact decades, you would understand and appreciate why it's a very important economic activity, because in many instances, persons who are engaged in this economic activity might not have benefited from more than secondary education. In one of the communities, in fact, for St. Lucia, we find that the majority of the fishers who were targeted in the study just obtained primary education. Now, this sector also provides employment in post-harvest subsector activities, marketing, trading, and processing. When we look at the IPCC special report on oceans and cryosphere, the summary of the policymakers point to the shifts in fish distribution and decreases in abundance. And Jimena was able to talk about that earlier. So this is just to sort of set the context that these projections, these observations are critical in terms of providing a point of reference for comparison when we undertake the research. So in the context of the region and in the context of my research, we want to be able to manage risk. And if you're going to manage risk in relation to the sector, then you have to have sufficient data. And personally, I feel that a lot of attention has been paid to the sort of biophysical aspects of the risk, because of course, the science itself drives that. But when we're talking about vulnerability, colleagues, it's important that we try to understand the balance. Because my argument is that one can be exposed to the climatic hazards. Of course, that doesn't mean that you're going to be vulnerable or your vulnerability would be high. There are some social factors that would determine the level of your vulnerability. And so because of insufficient knowledge that's needed to really inform the plans, this particular study becomes relevant. So in this study, there are specific objectives. What's the extent to which fishery systems of a coastal community, coastal communities are exposed to climate change, the ability of the community fishery systems to change and to cope with the changes in action expected climate stress, to look at the historical impacts of climate variability, to examine the degree to which local communities' economies are dependent on fisheries, and to recommend measures. So basically, the methodological approach comprised this review of existing literature, climate modeling data provided by the UE Climate Studies Group at MONA, and to a very large extent, the social surveys and key informant interviews, so that we use a sort of plurality of approaches to try to understand reality. In my work, I've also, because I'm looking at vulnerability, I've selected the basic equation: vulnerability is equal to exposure plus sensitivity minus adaptive capacity, or there's another one where you multiply exposure by sensitivity and divide by adaptive capacity. And 4 different climatic conditions were considered: heavy rains, extreme temperature, strong winds, and drought. Of course, when we look at the fishery system, I think it's important to understand that we're talking not only about habitats and in terms of the natural environment, the built environment, because the physical infrastructure is very critical if we're going to talk about vulnerability to the different climatic conditions, but also the economic system and the social system. So quickly, I want to talk about some of the important or the critical issues that I think you should pay attention to. Both communities, Manchineel and Labouré, of course, Manchineel in Jamaica and Labouré in St. Lucia, are examples of locational vulnerability. We find that Labouré is on the southwest coast of St. Lucia and Manchineel on the southeast coast of Jamaica. They're both exposed not only to very bad weather in terms of winds and hurricanes, but also, for example, in 2013, there would have been a flood that would have affected the Labouré, there would have been a flood that affected the Labouré community. This was subsequent to a tropical storm, Thomas, in 2010. And of course, on the slide, you can see a sort of chronological order of some of the hurricanes that would have impacted Manchonil as a community. So they're both exposed. This is just a slide that again shows the probability of the hurricane, and to really show that in different parts of Jamaica are subject to the impacts of hurricane at different levels. Now, I want to just focus on some of the findings and just to highlight in a very descriptive way the impacts. So let me just also tell you that the surveys involved 101 respondents from Manchonil and 114 respondents from St. Lucia. So this represented over 80% of the targeted subjects. Decline in catch rate, making selling less available and households consumption being impacted. So we're talking here about nutritional intake. Lots of juvenile fish were caught. There's seasonal fluctuation of market prices of the fish, increased safety risk to the fishers who will go out at sea, especially during the weather conditions that were unfavorable. Heavy storms would have damaged their facilities, not only the boats, but also the gear that was used, as well as when we look at the physical infrastructure like access roads. And of course, the disruption to their family life due to the socioeconomic insecurities. And if I were to link that with this other slide, the decline in the fish catch would have been related to degradation of the habitats. Coral bleaching is one, because a lot of the fish use the corals as a very critical habitat. Loss of productivity and livelihoods of fishers. Now, this is very critical, particularly to Labourade, because when you considered that fishing was really a culture and that many persons did not have higher educational levels than the primary education, then you can see why the loss of livelihoods related to fishing would be extremely significant. However, on a more positive note, a number of respondents talked about the introduction of new species that they thought was a good impact. Apart from what the fishers would have experienced due to the different weather conditions, particularly the heavy rains and the tropical storms, they had to grapple with issues of the excessive use of chemicals, agrochemicals, the pesticides, because here we're talking about pollution of the habitat, the sediment loading, the issue of dredging, the sewage outfall from hotels, thermal effluents from energy projects. And one of the social issues that was identified, which would have implications for the future, is the lack of interest of youth in the fishing sector. The fishers also identified a number of challenges. Of course, these challenges would help us to understand why we need to focus in a very holistic way when we talk about building resilience to climate. So the small craft vessels that are overcome by storm surge, maybe one might argue that given the size of the vessel, nothing different is expected. But then what's the implication for the future? Should they come together as cooperatives and to have more resilient vessels? Failure to integrate modern fishing technology was another issue. The influx of sargassum, which got the boats entangled and also created risk to their safety. Unsustainable fishing practices that would have impacted on the generations in terms of the fish species. Lack of or poor maintenance and proper storage and processing facilities. This was a complaint that was made in both communities. Poor marine management and lack of enforcement. You know, this comes up in many other environmental issues and problems. Late payment for fish by hotels. The issue of large senior fish pots. Loss of coral reef and limited access to loans. So if we were to disaggregate these challenges, you would see that they're social, they're economic, they're physical, and so on. So an interesting question is, how much do you know about climate change? And for Manchineel, of course, nothing, we have over 36%, just over 1/3. But in Labouré, 94% said little, well, just informed us that they had very little knowledge about climate variability or climate change. I'm not going to go into the index, but just by way of concluding, the study showed that Manchineel fishery system is more vulnerable to storms and extreme temperatures, while Labouré fishery system is more vulnerable to storms and droughts, respectively. The important point, I think, of this exploratory study is that vulnerability of communities' fishery systems is really influenced by a combination of factors. Demographic factors, because you have to look at the demographic profiles of fishers. I already indicated that just having the primary education would limit the capacity of fishers to even think of alternative livelihoods, because maybe what is available requires a particular skill. Geographical, I talk about locational vulnerability. Socioeconomic, in the study, more than 60% of households depended on fisheries as the main income activity. Political, because the fishers also talked about the need to be involved in decision-making. They bemoan the point that sometimes policymakers decide to institute measures without engaging them in any effective manner. And therefore, what they're saying is that there is need for them to be integrally involved. Cultural, because in particular, Labouré, we find that the fishing activity was passed down from generations. It's a culture. And so many fishers didn't consider it necessary to think of any alternative. So that when you're talking about lessening vulnerability, you really need to embrace a holistic and a multidimensional approach to ensure that all aspects are considered. In the study, there are several recommendations. I don't want to go through them, but just to highlight economic recommendations for incentives for diversification of livelihoods, insurance mechanisms, providing safety nets for households. Physical, we have to improve the market infrastructure to really address the issue of storage, more reliable cooling systems. We have to create and enhance awareness of climate change and climate variability and what are the implications, facilitate training workshops, provide opportunities for skills enhancement so that they can access other livelihood opportunities, generate more scientific studies to provide ecological data, as Jimena would have shown in her work. Ecological, we have to improve monitoring of the activities, establish fish sanctuaries to protect the habitat, to increase opportunities for fishes to be involved in management. So we're talking about co-management. Technological, we have to look at technologies that would really help them to be able to have, to ensure viability of the fishing activity, but at the same time to lessen the impact on the species themselves. And of course, engage the community in the development of community level disaster response plans. It's okay to have a countrywide plan, but I think that it's important, it is even more important to look at the community level and to see how we can develop response plans that will speak to their specific context. Given the impact of the storm on their assets, fishers identified the need for safe areas for anchorage of their boats, and of course to store their fishing equipment. There are several persons I want to acknowledge, but I just want to drop this slide and to thank the IDB and through the University of the West Indies, in particular, Professor Michael Taylor and Dr. Stevenson for just providing this opportunity for me to do the study. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bynoe. And we have had a series of interesting presentations so far, and we will now be moving into our panel discussion. You can start preparing your questions as well, because this part should go fairly quickly. And once we open the floor, or we open the webinar to questions, you can either raise your hand or you can use the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. So now getting right into it. For the benefit of those of us who are not working in fisheries, why is this work important? I'll throw this one to Susan and so to Kim.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Pierre. This work is important because when we look at climate change in general, climate change is, we live on small islands, many of us, and coastal countries, as members of CARICOM and in the Caribbean. We are going to suffer the worst. Climate change is going to affect us at the individual level. Every one of us will be impacted in some way. Life as we know it, our environment, our food, especially if you like fish, quality of life, security of life. So, I mean, I think even if you didn't get many of the very technical messages that came across this morning, I hope that you understood enough to realize that we're very vulnerable as small islands, and the fisheries sector is going to see some serious impacts. Jimena spoke about the number of extinctions that we can expect, and she was only able to show you a few maps They produced 110 maps, species maps. And when you look at these maps, it's really very, telling what to expect. So why is it important? At the individual level, every one of us, just like COVID, we will be impacted.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
Yes, I would say that small-scale fishers are highly exposed at sea, and alongside other vulnerabilities, they face high levels of risk each time that they push off from the shore. At the same time, ICT has become a critical channel for social interaction, learning, health, welfare, and livelihoods. We can ensure the inclusion of these fishers through context-appropriate, context-sensitive ICT tools, as well as the enabling operations and environments. And that is a key part of the importance of this work.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim. Okay, so the other next question. What was the most surprising finding coming out of the work that you presented on? And I'll throw this one to Jimena and Dr. Bynoe.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre. I guess I would reflect on a couple of things that I found surprising, not having a ton of direct experience in Caribbean fisheries management prior to a couple of years ago, in that in the region there are already a number of policy instruments, protocols, guidance to help with climate change adaptation and disaster risk management in the fisheries sector. So there are a number of well thought out and stakeholder consensus-based ideas on how to improve the climate resilience of the sector, but there is an implementation gap. And I think something that really resonated with me from Dr. Mallalieu's presentation was the behavioral aspect and the realization that individuals and agencies have multiple pressing decisions to make, concerns that have kind of shorter term implications. And so getting their behaviors to switch to focusing on more long-term preparations and trying to put in place measures to avoid disaster risks and climate change impacts is a little bit what drives the implementation gap. So that's one of the things that I found surprising, in that there are many instruments out there and good ideas about what could be done, but there are gaps on the implementation side.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Bynoe?
Yes, thank you. I suppose one thing that surprised me was the very high percentage of the respondents who indicated that they had very little knowledge of climate change and climate variability, because I know that in the region, a lot of work has been done and you have a lot of educational materials, but somehow it causes us to reflect on maybe the tools that are used, whether those tools are reaching the fishers, given the critical role of fishers in ensuring we have food security in the region. The other point that I was a bit surprised at is that very early, decades ago, we were teaching and talking about the importance of co-management in relation to natural resources. So when the fishers talked about the need to be involved in decision-making to build resilience, I was surprised, because this should not be something new. We always talked about the advantages of ensuring that those who are targeted for specific policy interventions are given political capital to impact the process of decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bynoe. And I agree with you, because other studies that are done in other segments of the population would show that there's a wider awareness of climate change. They may not exactly know the terminology, but most people are at least aware that it is happening although some of them may describe it more in terms of what they may see in the weather. You know, you notice that year on year, summers get hotter, or you see less rainfall, or you experience more drought. Okay, now the next question. Are there any challenges to building resilience into fisheries, and how can we navigate them? And I will throw this one, Susan, Jimena, and Kim.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Pierre. Perhaps I'll just go first. There are challenges at many levels. You know, we've heard from the presenters that we have, you know, it's an industry where it's predominantly small-scale operators. Some of them don't have much education. They know a lot about fishing. They're very wise about their fishing. Many of them are skilled. They have learned to be skilled business people. But education is something that is a stumbling block, especially as we cope with, you know, building climate resilience. And we've got to consider how to adapt. That is going to require some retooling. And so I think education is a major challenge for our fishers. At the enabling environment level, ownership is a big challenge. You see, fisheries is often much talked about. Everybody wants everything from fisheries, and there's a lot of talk now even about blue economy. But there is still low investment in the fisheries sector. So we are the poor cousin. And so this is a challenge. And in, you know, sorry, was it just the challenges you wanted me to cover, Jean-Pierre?
No,
could you repeat the question?
Asking how we can navigate them.
All right. Well, in the case of the enabling environment, let me deal with that one. In the case of the enabling environment, because of the ownership issue, because of the low investment issue, I think that we need to be clever in our strategy in fisheries. We have a small voice. No matter where we go, no matter, even if it's a pure fisheries meeting, we have trouble getting on, you know, getting the attention of the big decision makers. So I think it's very important for us to look at our richer cousins, such as the tourism sector and the energy sector, the land-based agriculture sector, and see the links, find the links to fisheries, how fisheries is actually linked to these sectors, and to be able to ride on their agendas and to identify entry points so that we actually get our issues addressed through all of the ongoing plans and decisions. And I say that because I say that from the experience of having to defend fisheries on many platforms. With regard to fisheries education, I do believe that you can teach an old dog new tricks. So I believe that there is, we have to look at opportunities to educate the fishers who are in the fishery. And I think we also have to speak. We have to begin speaking, even though we know we're poor, we know we are poor, but we have to become a more elite group. So we have to try and bring in the young entrepreneurs that are coming in. We need to encourage ones that will be operating at a higher level and be able to navigate, to use your term, the issues that we are going to face with building climate resilience. But there's an ongoing process, and for the moment, we do have to find ways of working with our existing fishers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. That was very content-filled. Jimena?
Yeah, it's pretty tough to follow up on that response. That was pretty comprehensive. But I would say that another challenge, and we see this even in Canada, is that, you know, with land-based economic activities, there's just a lot more data and a lot more monitoring with the ocean. You know, no one sees what's underneath, and it can be easily forgotten. But there is an opportunity with the emerging sort of blue economy paradigm and the new interest in sort of ocean sciences by many international organizations and even sort of Canada and the Global Affairs Canada. The challenge that I see there, so there's an opportunity, but also we have to be cautious and make sure that the voices of small scale fishers and issues of equity and socially equitable outcomes are forefront in any sort of developments related to participating more fully in the blue economy and other issues of ocean governance. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Tim?
Yeah, the challenge, as I said, is that building resilience requires a change in behavior. And if you want to change behavior, there are two things you need to do. One is you need to present a value proposition for that change. And the second is you need to reduce the barriers to changing behavior. And if we focus specifically on the reduction in barriers, the solution is a mixed bag, but at the center of it, it is optimization. And so, for example, it is necessary to leverage what I mentioned in my presentation, which is the intersecting agendas of multiple sectors that have DRM as a focus, serving the vulnerable, taking care of the vulnerable as another focus, and recognizing that not only ICT is a critical tool, but also, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's just one tool of many. Mm-hmm. So the leveraging of agendas, of intersecting agendas across sectors is necessary to optimize resources and to enable the infrastructure, the services, the operations, and the legal and regulatory environment that are all necessary to reduce the barriers to entry of using any tool, in particular, in my case, ICT. And I would love to go on about that. So the final thing, of course, is integration. The integration of what it is you want to see in a change in behavior in all of regular operations. So the integration in the arbitrary case of ICT, the integration of ICT in regular operations, the seamless integration of ICT in training, so that it is not some, as Susan would say, poor cousin, but it is simply and naturally a part of what we do in operations, in training, etc.
Okay, thank you. So the next question to everyone, actually. What do you think would be the best outcome for regional fisheries? And we can start with Dr. Bynoe.
Thank you. Well, the question in terms of I'm not sure that I have an answer for the best outcome, because as I would have mentioned before, the issue of vulnerability is really multidimensional. So you have to really address it at all fronts. But I think that for regional fishery sector, we really have to look carefully at the critical infrastructure, given the projections related to higher temperatures, given the projections about the intensity of the storms. Because sometimes based on my study, those were aspects that I think were not given equal consideration. So it's not only about the fish catch, but also the infrastructure that I think would be very, very important. And I just want to quickly say something that's linked, but related in a way to the earlier question that you made. The point is that we will have the natural hazards. We have no control over hazards. I feel that in the context of rural communities, and this relates specifically to my work, we must understand clearly that the hallmark of sustainable livelihoods in rural communities is diversity. So the more projects that we can have that will diversify households the households that currently show fishing is the dominant activity as an income generator. If we can address that, I think in terms of the future, we can build resilience at the household and at the community level. Thank you.
Okay, Susan?
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Well, considering the project that we've just concluded, considering what contribution that makes, and the findings, we have found, for example, it was an interesting result for me to see that, you know, because of the overfishing and the illegal fishing pressures, that this is going to exacerbate the expected extinctions. So a good regional outcome that is within our grasp is actually to achieve sustainable fisheries management and address the issue, really put pressure to combat IUU fishing. Who should love an illegal operator? Nobody should love an illegal operator, right? So in theory, that should be an achievable and a good regional outcome because it will lessen the impact of climate change. I think that is one very important regional outcome that we know this from the impact assessment. So it's something that we can address. Another thing that we know, because they tell us that we're going to be dealing with a diminished resource base. So we know that we have to still eat and we have to still make money, but we have to do it with less fish. So we have to aim for zero wastage. And this is where value chain development, the fisheries value chain, and trying to make sure that we use every part of that fish, let it work for us. That is another key regional outcome. We have regional bodies working on value chain development right now. So I think this also is within our reach. And another third one, maybe, that is not so easy within our reach, but it's something that we definitely have to think about. And that is our fishers need to learn, they may need to adapt with new gears and new technology. And this is where I was speaking about the education. I think it's going to be very important. And I think that Kim makes a very valid point about changing behavior. So we need to really consider and strategize about changing behavior, because adaptation, we know that it's going to be very important because there's no stopping climate change now. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Jimena?
The number one regional best outcome for the regional fisheries. I think in the updated version of the climate change and disaster risk management strategy and action plan for Caribbean fisheries, so for the region overall, there are a number of outcomes that are highlighted as desirable for the next 10 years. And Susan has spoken about them briefly in her intervention just now. And one of the things that I would add to the points that Susan made is I see as attainable, or two things I guess that I see as attainable is our building or enhancing regional monitoring to ensure that responses by fishers and agencies on the ground are trending in the right way with respect to climate change impacts. And so building out this monitoring system that looks at measures changes in the ocean as well as the atmosphere. And we've talked about how monitoring stations are being augmented in the region. But not just that, looks at fish biology, looks at socioeconomic responses at the community level, and to get a more system-wide view of how the fishery sector is adapting to the changes that are coming. So I do see that as within the region's grasp. And one of the outputs of the project was a monitoring framework that laid out sort of a series of very big questions and the types of indicators and ways you might go about measuring measuring specific subsystems to answer those questions. And so there are already some ideas there, and you could, start small and build out. But I know that there are a number of regional initiatives that are trying and investing in enhanced monitoring. So there really is, again, an opportunity to kind of align all those initiatives to make sure that climate change and keeping track of the changes that are coming and how the sector is adapting are not lost in the shuffle. And then I guess the other regional outcome that I would mention here is, and it goes along with Susan's message about the fishery sector sort of amplifying its voice and integrating better with other sectors, and the whole message of integration of ICTs and with disaster risk management and everything like that, is an outcome that I would like to see, is that the region gain access to additional climate finance that is being made available. And I do think on a regional basis that, based on my experience working with other global regions, that the institutions are in place, institutions are in place, the policy and initiatives ideas are in place, and now it's a matter of, kind of mobilizing to make sure that that those resources are accessed. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Jimena. Kim?
Yeah, so if you're asking about the best outcome, I'm going to answer purely from the perspective of my presentation, not universally, not philosophically or with any priority, other than located in the context of my presentation. Then I'd say the best outcome is that fishers use information and communications technology, and that is to say, not only the cell phone, but the cell phone, the maritime band VHF radio, and the GPS. They do so with fluency and comfort, and that they can access affordable underlying services through the required infrastructure, governance frameworks, and operations. What this requires is 3 key impact streams to be operating in the back end. One impact stream is the enabling environment impact stream. And that enabling environment, of course, includes policy and regulatory matters. And there are many. And I'm saying this is not limited to the fisheries sector. It applies to all of the sectors that have interacting and intersecting agendas for the same endpoint. So that's one impact stream, which is the enabling environment. There's another impact stream, and that is capacity. Again, capacity built through all organizations and fisher folk towards this end, yes? And when I say capacity built, I do not mean in a classroom. I mean in situ, context appropriate, fit for purpose. And then the final impact stream in my universe for today is innovation. And when I say innovation, I mean, of course, technological innovation, but very much I also mean market innovation. And in the context of my presentation, that is the ICT services market. So all of these things are necessary for this best outcome, which is that fishers just use ICT without having to think about it because it's affordable, it works, and they can get the service wherever they are.
And I think based on the fulsomeness of those answers, we would have cleared up the rest of my questions. Now opening up to attendee questions. So if you have a question as an attendee, you can either ask a question in the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise and you will be acknowledged. We actually already have a question here from Peter Murray from the CRFM Secretariat, who is asking, how do we get the very important and fascinating results and outputs of this project converted into fisheries management and development initiatives? What mechanisms are there for this? And I think the best person to answer that might be Susan.
Thanks to Peter, who works with me. And yes, that is, you make a correct statement. I think that these results are very, they're very important for us right now. They actually provide enough information, I believe, that we can begin to lobby for the changes and the actions that we want. We should not wait for information to get better, okay? So let me make sure I read the question. So into fisheries management and development initiatives. I am aware that the products as they stand now, all our technical reports, they are available on the CRFM website, they are available on the CRFM portal, but the CRFM has been discussing the development of additional products so that we have not just the technical reports, which are often very interesting for the technical persons and the scientists and so on to follow up in their, if they are doing follow-up work. But we need to be able to prepare products that provide simpler messages, sort of downscale, for want of a better word, downscale the technical nature of those messages so that they can be understood by our fisheries managers and planners. I think that we need to have also more engagement, not just this webinar, but we need to be engaging constantly with stakeholders, with policymakers and decision makers, so that we continue to get the messages over about what we have found with the impact assessments, even with fewer, the work with fewer. We are working with SEDIMA, and as this work continues, our CRFM membership, we had 4 pilot countries involved in the viewer, and there are other countries in the CRFM membership, and there are countries outside of the CRFM membership which are interested in that fewer solution. So it's very important for CRFM to maintain that momentum. And I think we will only be able to achieve that through additional products for communicating, to aid communication and to aid engagement, and also may ensure that these are available for work at the national level when they are doing their national planning and consultations. So I hope that addresses the question, Peter.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Now we have a question from YouTube. Teddy Allen is asking, are you aware of any oceanographic data that has been asked for by the sector but has not yet been delivered? I am curious to better understand the data gaps that have the potential to be filled. For example, are marine heat waves of interest fisheries workers?
Okay, Jean-Pierre. It's an interesting question. If something is beginning to impact us in some way, we want information about it. Sorry, are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing it.
Okay. Marine heat waves, I'm not familiar with the term, but it seems to suggest that it might be related to ocean temperature. It might impact on ocean temperature. It might impact on sea conditions as well. If these things can help us to improve the advice, the services that we have to provide the sector, I would say that these things become important. They become important when we begin to feel their impacts. Look at the example of sargassum.
Yes, it's true.
You know, we didn't think about sargassum until we started to have large influxes, and the scientists are still scrambling to understand that. With fewer, for example, it is possible that marine heat waves might impact sea conditions. I'm not sure, but there are, if perhaps the person who has posed the question is also aware of possible impacts for fisheries, it would be good to share that. But the exchange, it's clear that this webinar, for example, and it's been a very good opportunity to engage with people who we haven't been communicating with before this opportunity. It allows us to understand where next we may need to go. So that's my suggestion so far, but I'm not sure if the other panelists or Kim may have any ideas whether these marine heat waves might be important for fewer services in the future. Or even Jimena might know, yes, as well.
I just quickly, from my point of view, from the development work with FEWA, is that and this, I'm speaking out of my crease, but as I understand it, the availability of hydromet data is very, very limited in the Southern Caribbean. In the Northern Caribbean, we can benefit from a slew of very comprehensive NOAA products, but the actual, there is, for our purposes, there is a tremendous need for data on the issues that fishers are interested in. They have said to me that they're interested in the wavelength of the waves, of course, the wave height, etc. What I understand from all of the countries, and I may be incorrect, but this is what I understand from the Met offices in all of the countries, is that the marine environment is the area of least competence and least attention. At least this was 3 years, up to let's say 3 years ago. So there's a tremendous amount of interest in FEWA. What we do is we scrape the websites of the local Met offices to present local meteorological data, weather data in the app. If there were multiple monitoring sources because of the issue of predictions and the experience that many fishers have with the predictions made. Let me try to speak very generally. I'm just saying there is need for more data on the marine environment in the Southern Caribbean. Of course, heat wave information would be relevant and interesting, but there is a greater need for the more fundamental data on wave height, current wave height, for now casting, in addition to forecasting, for now casting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions?
Sorry, just very quickly, as part of the project, we did a knowledge attitudes practice study at sort of towards the beginning that targeted fisher folk. I believe it was, I can't remember the number now, but hundreds of fisher folk, as well as fisheries managers and policy actors, so mainly chief fisheries officers. And one of the questions, or a couple of the questions, is around like what kind of climate change hazards are you concerned about, or do you want information on? And marine heat waves we did not specifically ask for that one, and it didn't come up, but I would second what Dr. Mallalieu said, because changes in ocean currents was a factor and a hazard that people were concerned about across the board. As well, ocean acidification also emerged as something important that people wanted more information on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so we don't see any hands in the attendees list, and there aren't any more questions in the Q&A. Okay, so with that being said.
Sorry, Jean-Pierre, there is a question for Jimena in the chat.
Oh, she answered it directly.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. My apologies.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So thank you so very much to our attendees for joining us, staying with us. And I'm hoping that you have found this webinar interesting, informative. As we said, we will be sharing all the results with you. We'll be sharing the outputs. We'll be sharing this recording as well. And a special thank you to our panelists. I mean, even though I'm involved in the project, I still learned so much this morning. And you have presented it in such a way that it is very logical and also very applicable. Okay, so we have a lot of commendations coming in. We have thank you from Leslie, thank you from Peter. Oh, there was also, okay, so Teddy over at YouTube did say, excellent response, thank you. And he also concurred that buoy data for monitoring wavelength and wave period is lacking in the Southern Caribbean. He's saying that sail drones may help, and he'll relay that information and hope to support. Patrick Prendergast said, thank you for this engagement. All right, so with that being said, again, thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and do keep safe in these uncertain times.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
much.
you. Enjoy your
Bye,
day.
everyone.
Bye.